Welcome back to our second episode with the Growe family, 3 generations of Holocaust survivors. You're listening to the Obligations of Memory podcast for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeffrey Geisner. Again, I'm honored to present all of the Growes in front of you, and you'll be hearing from each one of them. We have Mrs. Growe, who's 98. We have Steve Growe, the eldest. We have Ron Growe, the middle. We have Mike, and then we have Marilyn. And we also have a 3rd generation in Seth. So let's get started. We started talking about how your grandparents. Now I'm going to ask the question about you've all, what happened when you decide to leave the home and you are starting to go on your own. So the question from your perspective is, to help me get an answer, how was it for your parents to leave home, for you to leave home? If you went to college, that's great. If you chose a different career, I'd love to know that. And how was it for you to leave the nest? So who's going to be first?
I guess I can speak on that. They helped me pack. I was one of those lost souls in the 70s that really nobody was sure what was going to make of me. And as my mother, she always had the proverbial question, do you want to be a garbage collector? And I was just telling Michael the story. Finally, I had enough liquid courage at a simcha where I said, do you know how much money garbage men really make? And that was kind of like, sealing my door, that I knew that I was going to have to walk my own walk and find my own way in life. I was not college material like my younger brother and sister. I was more into instant gratification and making money. So I got into sales.
What kind of sales?
Let's see. In the beginning, before I got into sales, I was trying to get into restaurant, hotel management. And that was just like lots and lots of hours. And I soon discovered that while they respect you on the job, when you think they're your buddy and you meet them outside of work, they wouldn't give you 2 nickels to rub together. So I got into selling car audio at Mickey Shores. It's a local aftermarket audio chain. And that was my first real taste at making some good commission. I mean, I'd done other sales like in a clothing store and whatnot, and I discovered I had a flair for it, but didn't really make any money. Make $1 on a pair of pants, you're not making a living. You're not setting the world on fire. But I had a short stretch selling motorcycles, and I liked that a lot. So from there, I branched off into car audio, where I actually made a living and provided for my family. The problem is it was retail. I had to learn the lesson from my own father that can mean long, arduous hours. And sometimes there are days when you don't make anything, and sometimes you get the fatted calf. But it was a way to learn where your strengths and weaknesses are, and to appreciate what you have in your pocket and what you're going to save for.
And what were some of the lessons that your mom and dad told you when you left the house?
My dad always told me, if you make $5 with the money you made, buy a wallet, put one in there and leave it there. Don't spend 6. Don't live for tomorrow. And my mother too was very adamant about stashing money away. We learned, to this day, I probably lost a couple $1,000s throughout the moves, hiding money on myself that I'll find later on that I never found. So, you never know when a Hitler's going to come through your town. You never know when you're going to need it. Just to have it. My dad always said, don't walk around broke. If you're making a living, keep money in your wallet, and don't use the credit card like it's no tomorrow. Again, the same philosophy. Make 5, don't spend 6. And that was his thing.
Well, let me go to Ron. I'm going to go as the age order. What was your recollection of you leaving the nest? What did your parents say about it?
Well, I was so comfortable, I didn't want to go. I went to Oakland Community College for a couple of years for an associate's degree in liberal arts, and thought I would launch myself into the clothing business that, like my parents, working at the store. And the most I wound up doing there was security guard. But I did work at Jeans and Things for a short stint. And that was a friend of the family that owned a clothing business on 9 Mile in Ferndale. And I think Steve and Mike worked there as well. That's where we got a taste of working retail menswear. And I was a very shy person growing up, and that kind of brought me out of my shell a little bit, interacting with other people, wanting to help them, improve their casual wardrobe, because Jeans and Things was like a camping store that sold Levi jeans or other off-brand jeans in the community.
And where was your strength in your career? Like, where did you feel like you?
That came from my parents. I watched and I observed how they interacted with the customers in their store, and their customers became friends, and their friends came back with other friends. So I never really, their customers were clients. They were not so-called customers. It was always the same face again and again and again and again.
Very well said.
So if I ever had my own business, which I eventually did later, which changed directions altogether, I eventually got into landscaping. And to this day, I have clients that I've been with for over 25 years and vice versa.
Nice. So in the winter in Detroit, are you snow plowing?
Snow shoveling. I did snow removal. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go to Mike.
So a few things. I started my early work also at Jeans and Things, as Rob alluded to, which by the way was just down the block from our parents' store, the Fashion Center in fashionable friendly Ferndale, which our father coined when he was chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in Ferndale. So it was a friend of the family's and just down the block from where their store was. And none of us ever worked in their store and I saw it too. There wasn't really much for our father to do in a women's clothing store. Women then wanted to be waited on by other saleswomen. So my mother was busy and she was a seamstress and they had women working for them, but my father was all behind the scenes. So he was the buyer, he was the schmoozer with the other business people, but he had very little to do waiting on customers. So it's like there was nothing for us other boys to do. I'll let Marilyn talk her part when she gets that. But so I did go to work just like they did at Jeans and Things with the Webermans, who were very close with our parents, and so they were sort of like second parents. And what I do remember working at Jeans and Things, I started working there when I was only 15 years old. And this part you won't believe, Seth, how I used to get to work every day after high school is I would hitchhike. I would hitchhike, down Coolidge, from 12 Mile and Coolidge down to 9 Mile. And then I would get out and I would get another ride from somebody from 9 Mile and Coolidge to 9 Mile and Woodward, where I worked. I mean, these are all each only like 3 miles each way, but still in 1975, it was still safe, for a 15-year-old to hitchhike by himself, or maybe it wasn't, but who knew any better? So that's how I would get to work.
So let's talk about you leaving the nest to go to get an education.
Okay. So I always did very well in school. It just sort of came very naturally to me. And I was talking about this with my mom earlier. I never felt, pushed by my parents to succeed. Like, you have to do well, you have to do this, you have to do that. But I just always liked it. I mean, I liked getting good grades. I mean, I got acknowledgement and reward or whatever, but I was never like under pressure, like you have to succeed. And it just came very easy to me. I was a very natural student. And so I did very well, mostly in math and science, but pretty much everything. And so I just always assumed I was going to go to college. It was never really discussed like there was any other option. And when you went to my high school, to Berkeley High School, if you were among the smarter kids, and I was like in the top, 5% of my class, you went to the University of Michigan. It was just like, wasn't even a question. And I was saying this, I don't even remember applying to another university. And so I applied. So I don't know I didn't have a plan B. So I applied. I'd never even been there though. I didn't even know what the University of Michigan was. I didn't go on a campus visit. It was only 45 minutes away, but I never even went to the campus. It's just, that's what you did. That's where you went. So I didn't even question it. And so I was 17 years old and here I am applying to the University of Michigan and I got accepted and that's what I did. And it was kind of the best of both worlds because it's far enough away where you're out from the nest, right? And I lived on campus, you didn't commute. I lived on campus in a dorm, but it's close enough that you could go home on weekends and have your mother do your laundry. And that's what I did, right, Mom?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just waiting because I was going to ask you this question because I went to school at Temple University in Philadelphia, just an hour from Allentown, and I brought my laundry home. And my mom was happy to actually do my laundry. So I'm glad that you brought it forward. So before
Seth, I bet that probably didn't happen to you, but.
No, not at all.
I didn't think so. Yeah,
My mom was like, do your own laundry. I'm like, I'm 12. I don't even know how to use the washing machine.
Exactly. But back to the leaving the nest. So like I said, I was encouraged to go to college, but I was never pushed or said you got to go. But what was great is, I couldn't have done it without my parents. They paid for everything. And back then, tuition wasn't very much. I mean, I seem to recall like it was like $500 a semester or something like that. And even the room and board at the dorm, really wasn't very much. But they paid for it all because I didn't really have anything saved away. And at that point, I didn't apply for grants or scholarships. So they paid for undergrad, and that made it feasible for me. And I did pretty well at the University of Michigan. It was tougher than Berkeley High School because it was like I was at the top 5% there. Suddenly you're at a university where everybody was in the top 5% of their school. And suddenly it was a lot harder. But what I will say is that, like I said, they really encouraged me, and I graduated and got my degree, my bachelor's in economics. And I decided I wanted to go on and get my master's, my MBA in finance. And they said, well, that's great, but we're done paying. So if you want to go, you support yourself. And that's when I applied for some grants, but mostly I took out loans. And now people would laugh if I told them, I was worried when I graduated, I had like $10,000 in student loans. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to ever pay this back? But, it really wasn't that tough. And, once I started working, I actually paid it off early because I think I had 10 years to pay it off, and I ended up just paying it off early. And it was at like 2% interest or something, but that's how I financed it. But they still helped me. So I got the loans to pay for tuition and everything, but they still helped with my living expenses. And I did work in summers. I worked at clothing stores over the summer at different places to help make some money too. But that's how I made it.
Why don't you share with the audience what your career was and what you eventually became?
Yeah, so my background was always in retail, and I eventually got into retail management. I managed a men's clothing store at a mall. I managed a Silverman's clothing store for a while. But then I did apply and got into the MBA program at Michigan. And like I said, I worked at clothing stores in the summer. But once I graduated, I got my first real job, and I got my degree in finance, my MBA in finance. So I got my first corporate job, actually in San Diego of all places, which is a whole nother story how I ended up there. But basically, I flew out there for an interview, and there I was in the middle of February. I left a blizzard, 20-degree Detroit, and got off the plane in 75-degree sunny San Diego. And I said, yeah, I'll take this. So they made me an offer. It was Burroughs at the time, which became Unisys. And they said, we'll make you an offer to either work at our corporate headquarters in Detroit or out here at our semiconductor facility in Rancho Bernardo, California. We don't care which one you take. We'll pay you the same amount of money, but we'll pay all your moving expenses to go to San Diego. You tell us what you want. I said, let me think about it. Well, that took like 3 seconds. I said, I'll take San Diego. They moved all my stuff out, and that was in 1985, and I've been there ever since.
And let's go over to Maryland and give you the opportunity to answer the same questions. You were leaving the nest. What was it like for mom and dad to let you go as the baby of the family? And what was it like for you to leave the nest? I'll also ask all of you to think about if you were affected by any anti-Semitism when you left the nest, and you can think about that. But maybe I'll take it away, Marilyn, and give me your response.
Okay. Well, first of all, talking about that I'm the baby of the family, I always tell people, and Mom, you might appreciate this. Can you hear me, Mom?
Yes.
You can hear me, Mom? Okay. I always tell people, and maybe my brothers have heard me say this, if you ever get the chance the next time around in life, choose to be born the baby girl with 3 older brothers, because your parents are exhausted. You get away with murder. You're the baby girl that your mother's been waiting for. Your brothers have already done everything to wear them out. So I had a very good life. I mean, my mother and father, I was the apple of my father's eye. My mom, she still calls me to this day. She calls me Dolly, right, Mom? Hello, Dolly. Every time I call and she'll sing to me, hello, Dolly. Well, hello. She breaks into a refrain because she's always called me Dolly. You guys know that. And anyway, so my parents, everyone's alluded to the fact that they had a retail store called the Fashion Center. It was women's clothing, not high end, not fancy. A lot of their customers were school teachers or housewives or women buying dresses to go to church or maybe suits for work, not real fancy. And I worked in their store in the summertime in high school, maybe one summer, but retail was in our family's blood. As you've heard, most of us have had jobs in retail. I worked in their store, and my father's hope was that one of his 4 children would take over the store. How easy would that be to have a successful, well-oiled company business just handed off to one of us? And I think much to their chagrin, none of us wanted to take that opportunity. They really did like that, right, Mom? You really wanted, you and Dad were hoping one of us would take over the store, or maybe even 2 of us together.
That was a dream.
Yeah, they wanted that, but for whatever reason, none of us decided to go that route. And like Michael said, they didn't push us to go to college. And I think part of that is because they were from Europe, and both of my parents' formal education was just until the 8th grade. My father in Vienna, as Michael mentioned, when he was 14, he went to China, and he did learn English. That was one of, my father said, one of the best decisions he ever made. You had to choose a second language. He chose English, and that led to many opportunities. My father always said he lived a charmed life. Many opportunities fell into his lap, starting with the fact that he could speak English. It opened doors for him and his family. Anyway, so my parents both only went to school until the 8th grade. My mother, even though she wasn't in the Holocaust until she was 19, after 8th grade, that's as far as the education went in her village. So then she got a job and moved to a bigger city, moved to Budapest for a short while. So my parents' college and university was not something emphasized in their life. And I think when they came to America, they didn't emphasize it in their children's lives. But because I had friends with American parents, it was a given. My friends were going to go to college. I just assumed I would go to college. I wanted to move out of the house and live in a dorm. So that's why I wanted to go to college. I wasn't thinking long-term, this will give me a career. I wanted to live in a dorm and have fun and chase boys and make friends and go to parties. So I went to Michigan State University. I had to fill out the applications. My parents weren't the type of parents that knew how to do these traditional American things. It wasn't something in their culture. So it really was up to us if we wanted to go to college. We had to take it upon ourselves to figure out how to do that. I remember being a kid and saying to my parents, to my mother specifically, tell me to do my homework, tell me to do my homework. We weren't disciplined, or at least I wasn't, maybe again, because I was the baby, but I wasn't told to brush my teeth. I wasn't told to wash my hair. It was, you know, until my hair was in tangles because I hadn't washed it for 4 days, my mother finally pushed me into the shower and combed out the knots. We weren't standard discipline. When I would sleep over at friends' houses, I saw a lack of discipline, which I loved. I never had a curfew. I was out till 1, 2 in the morning riding bicycles with friends. We weren't getting in trouble, but we didn't have to be in bed at a certain time. I watched Johnny Carson on TV with my brothers. It came on at 11 o'clock. I had to be 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. I couldn't wait to see Rich Little do his impressions. What 7, 8-year-old is watching TV at 11:30 after the news, watching Johnny Carson? My husband jokes with me that I was raised by a pack of wolves. He's like, we had no discipline at all compared to what he was raised with his Americanized parents that are 15 years younger than mine. Anyway, that said, so that's a little bit of my memory. I went on to college. I graduated with a degree in speech pathology, started to go to master's. 3 weeks into my master's program, realized I was in way over my head. And I, as a fluke, went on an interview to be a flight attendant with a girlfriend of mine. It was 60 people showed up for a mass interview. I was one of 4 people hired. And I was so afraid to tell my parents, all this money you spent on me going to college for 4 years, I'm now going to move to New York and become a flight attendant. And you know what my mother said when I told her? I remember on the stairs in the house where Terry lives now, I was coming down the stairs, Mom and Dad were walking up, and I told them, I have something to tell you. I got a job. I'm going to be a flight attendant with Eastern Airlines. And Mom said, you always wanted to be a stewardess. When we took you to Florida when you were 5, you said, I want to be a stewardess when I grow up. So I can tell you that I did the job. I did it for 2 years, but that created other opportunities in my life because I was based out of New York. But my mother never made me feel bad. She encouraged any decision I've made in my life was with her blessing. My father was not as thrilled that they put me through college and I decided to become a flight attendant. But I went on to other jobs in sales. I was a matchmaker. I worked as a headhunter.
You were a matchmaker.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
You can't drop that on us. Giving us some depth to that story.
Yeah.
Were you a
Yeah.
Jewish matchmaker? Or
Yeah,
you
I was a matchmaker. I
Jewish
worked for 4 years for a company called It's Just Lunch. And I literally would bring in clients, match them up. And I arranged over 50 marriages. I don't know how many divorces, but I definitely was responsible for 50 marriages. So my mom thinks that earns me points in heaven, right, Mom? If you make a shidduch, that's a very noble profession to be a
Yes.
matchmaker.
Yes, it's wonderful.
So I did not meet my husband through matchmaking. I met him through JDate online. I met my husband, and 3 months before I became a matchmaker. So I was the world's most happiest in love matchmaker. I had just met my husband to be 3 months before I became a matchmaker. So I wanted everyone to have what I had. So anyway, but fast forward, I ended up marrying, I always say this to my husband, Mark, I married my father. My husband had a furniture store. He was an entrepreneur, just like my father. I ended up working in my husband's store for the last 9 years my husband owned it for 15 years. During the last 9 years, I worked in the back office doing collections, making sure our customers paid their bill because nobody wants the bills paid like the wife of the owner. That's what I say. And anyway, but my husband reminds me of my father in all the best ways. My father knew a little bit about everything. Even though he only had an 8th grade education, my father was very well read, understood politics, came to this country, registered and served in the Korean Army and the Korean War, registered in the Army. He had no choice. You had to serve. But he did it with pride. He loved America. He took advantage of everything. He knew pop culture. You could talk to him about music, whether it was Mozart to Madonna. My father knew it all. He was an avid reader. I said this at his funeral, everything from Tolstoy to Playboy. He liked it all. He loves women. He appreciates a beautiful woman. He appreciates a good meal. He appreciated good conversation. And I married my father. My husband is wonderful. He's quieter, but if you get him talking, he can talk about any subject. Steve talked about how my father had great ethics. He ran his business. He treated his employees like they were family, treated his customers like they were family. In fact, my mother treated him so much like family. She wanted to give discounts to every customer, whether they asked for it or not. And my father would say, Rachel, stop, you're giving away the store, literally. And my husband does the same. When people would come to buy furniture, he'd give a discount, even if they weren't asking. So I married my mother and my father blended together, and I have a wonderful life. Don't have any children. That's probably my mother's biggest disappointment, is she doesn't have more grandchildren. My brother Steve is the only one who's given her children and great grandchildren, and that's my mother's number one joy in life, for the Kinderlach.
All right, so I'm going to tack on to this discussion. Those of you who are married, how does your spouse see you as a second generation? And what would they say the quirks that you're inherited from your parents from a second generation perspective?
I want Seth to answer that one, because that you get to see it undiluted when you think it would be.
I don't know how I would answer that question. How you're saying, how does my wife see me, or how do we see
well,
you
you
guys?
can answer that question as, how does your wife see you as a third generation? Is she also a third generation?
She's not. No.
Okay, so that will be one question to answer. The second question is, because of who you are, and you are a parent of a second generation, how have they influenced you, or what have you inherited from them? Could be positive, it could be negative, it could be trauma, it could be whatever. You know, there is a discussion that second generation and third generation have intergenerational trauma or PTSD. I'm one of those. I'll raise my hand, full stop. So before I get to you, Marilyn, let me ask Seth if he wants to answer that. If you don't want to, and to put you in a
Yeah.
spot, since your
No,
dad is here.
happy to. It's interesting because my wife and I have very different backgrounds. She grew up in Farmington Hills, Michigan. She was raised by her grandparents. They were not Holocaust survivors. She didn't have the same type of upbringing. And you know, if you think about what Marilyn said, that, you know, growing up, her parents were much older than her friends' parents. My wife's parents and my grandparents are about the same age, right? So, or within maybe a 10-year difference. So we had that similarity in that sense, because I was very close with my grandparents, my mom's parents, and my biological dad's parents, as well as Nana and Papa. We had that similarity, but she didn't have the trauma like I had growing up. And reading about that, I would say yes, I have some of that, maybe not as much as my mom or my uncles and aunt here, but
Seth, can you share what you feel you have as far as traumas?
You know, I joke with friends, or when I talk about it now, I joke and I say, you know, my daughter's 11, and the kinds of bedtime stories I read her are much different than the ones that I was read when I would stay at my grandparents' house. The kinds of books that I was read were picture books of the Holocaust. My grandparents would take out their false teeth and tell me if I didn't eat my food, then my teeth would fall out like theirs, because all they had to eat in the camps were grass. That's, you don't really think about it then. You're just kind of like, Jesus, right? But now you're kind of like, yeah, okay, that's a little bit of a traumatic experience. People seeing pictures of prisoners in the camps emaciated and bones, skin and bones. Those pictures don't faze me, because I've seen them all my life. But to my wife, those pictures are not ones that she's seen on a regular basis growing up. They're impactful, right? But she's incredibly supportive of the work that I do here in the Twin Cities. She's supportive of.
Why don't you explain to the audience what you're doing in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, so I'm part of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakota Speakers Bureau. It's a subgroup called Generations After Minnesota, and we are second and third generation survivors, sharing our grandparents' stories. So I have an opportunity to go into middle schools and tell 7th and 8th graders about my maternal grandmother's survival of 4 different concentration camps in the Holocaust. My wife is very proud of the work that I do. She understands that I have a level of stubbornness to me, which is handed down from generation to generation, Lindor Fedor. But she also supports the teachings to our daughter, and it's not a taboo topic in our household. My daughter knows all about the challenges that my grandparents, all of our grandparents, have gone through during the Holocaust. So and I have to say, everyone in the family knows this, but Nana's probably like the top 3 of my wife's favorite people in the entire world. Probably number 1. My daughter's number 2, and I'm probably number 3. But that's just the kind of person that Nana is.
So let me ask you a question. What are some of the things that you take away from your Nana? And you called her what? You have a cute
Nana.
No, but before.
So there's Nana Banana, and then there's Tootsie, Wootsy, Schwootsy, Pootsy, Gootsy. Take any kind of consonant and you can throw it into there. Yeah, a million different nicknames. But
Call her by the name you said earlier and see how she responds.
Tootsie Wootsie?
I'll respond to that anytime.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you've taken away? I'll ask you a two-part question.
Just
What are the things that you've taken away from your grandmother? And what benefit do you take internally from the work that you're doing educating youth?
From Nana, you just got to be a good person, and that's evident in my stepdad and my uncles and my aunt. You just got to be a good person. It's the same teaching that Papa had. You have to be kind. You have to give the benefit of the doubt. You have to just welcome people. The first time I met her, we came over, I think it was like we came over for Shabbat dinner or something like that. And my mom introduced, she says, Seth Martin, this is Steve's mom, Rachel. And she goes, oh no, you call me Nana. No, Rachel, it's okay. No, I'm Nana. Okay, you're Nana. And from that day, I don't even know when it was, but from that day, she was nothing more than Nana to me. And it's even weird hearing people refer to her as Rachel, because I'm like, oh yeah, that's Nana. But it's the family, it's the mishpacha, it's welcoming, it's be a good person and take care of others.
And what do you gain from your teaching children the lessons of the Holocaust?
It's kind of seeing the looks on their faces, realizing that it's not a story, it's real life. Some of the kids that I've taught are of kids of color who face their own challenges in life, and you realize you see that they have a realization that there's a relatability between a white person being discriminated against and being discriminated against because of someone's color. For us, it's religion. For someone else, it's color. It's a matter of being able to share the stories, being able to let them know this happened, it's real. We have to continue to educate ourselves and make sure that it doesn't happen again. And at the end of every session that I do, I reinforce that staying quiet and not standing up to defend someone is just as bad as being the person who's victimizing others. And because I've asked Nana before, and she mentioned it, I would hate for this to happen again. Nana said, I pray that this never happens again. And if people continue to stand up and be a voice and share and defend others, then hopefully we have a chance of it not happening again.
Now, have you anything that comes to mind, any letter that you have gotten from your students or your teachers of your students that literally in 2 seconds comes to mind that you were saying, oh my gosh, this was such a brilliant letter. Okay. Marilyn, you wanted to say something back then?
The only thing I was wondering is, Steve, is your wife Bonnie on this call? Is she here? Is she comfortable participating?
She's here. She did an interview with Jeff earlier. I don't know if she wants to, you want to chime in?
I don't know.
Come on, chime in.
Only because her mother, she comes from a survivor family and she might have a different point of view. And she, this is her son, Seth, on here. None of us have children. And I think Bonnie is a wonderful mother and has brought up 2 amazing kids. And she probably has something
No. We brought up 5 amazing kids.
Right.
One of the things that Seth alluded to is we never referred to them as steps. And that's something that Bonnie got from her mother, the same thing. They are my sons, they are my daughters, and I'm going to get all teary-eyed, so I'm going to let Bonnie talk.
Before I want to just, before you do, Bonnie, I want to introduce you as Bonnie Growe and wife of Steve. And part of the family, and I did do a separate episode with Bonnie, an interview for our podcast. So if you're interested in getting a whole 30 minutes of one-on-one Bonnie, she's available to you on a future podcast. So Bonnie, we're talking about your son, and we're talking about his education, or how he's teaching his own family, whether he feels some inherited trauma from your family. And when we talked about it together, why don't you give a little bit of background, not a lot, because we don't have the time for it all, but a little bit of your upbringing and why he would say that he has some trauma from your side.
My mother was the opposite person of Nana. My mother talked about Hitler and the war all the time. I was raised with Hitler had a seat at our dinner table, I used to say, because everything that happened in our household revolved around World War II, about losing her family, about being in the war. My mother was from Warsaw. She was in the Warsaw ghetto. She was part of the Warsaw Uprising, and she was in 3 different concentration camps. So my mother helped raise my 2 kids. I have a daughter as well. And my kids were very close with my mother, and she told them as much as she told me, and so that they would never forget. And she always told them, you have to carry on. You have to make sure that Hitler doesn't win. And by that, you have to marry Jewish people, and you have to live good Jewish lives. And you have to be a good person, and you just have to go on and show that this, you must never let it, let me back up, for as afraid as she was, and she was very afraid. She was afraid because she dressed funny and she had an accent, and those were things that she couldn't get away from. But for all of those things, she was grateful to be in America and grateful to be in the United States. And her biggest joy was having children. And my mother had, I believe, 11 grandchildren by the time she passed away. I could be wrong, but, and she told us, you know, to be good Jews. Everything revolved around being Jewish. My mother told me that if I married someone that wasn't Jewish, she was going to sit Shiva for me. She wasn't liberal. She wasn't open-minded. She was very narrow-minded about being Jewish, about the Holocaust. She was very skeptical about everyone that crossed her path. She was afraid of everyone. And she instilled that in my kids because they spent an awful lot of time with her. But from that, I think they got the understanding of how important it was of what she had been through, that it should never, ever happen again to her children and her grandchildren. I think that was the biggest lesson that my kids walked away with from having my mom as their bubby.
So Seth, any thoughts about hearing your mom and your grandmother?
Yeah, you left out have Jewish children. Because God forbid. No, it's I mean, I've ended romantic relationships because they were not Jewish, and I did not want to get too far down the line of developing feelings for someone that if I married and had children with, my grandmother would be rolling in her grave. No joke. And these girls that were on the other end of this thought I was absolutely nuts because they didn't understand it. And if anything, that just reinforced the need, I guess, for me to find someone Jewish and marry someone Jewish and have Jewish babies, because if they didn't understand why that was important to me, then the whole rest of the relationship, they wouldn't understand, at least from my eyes. But that, I mean, that was traumatic, right? But you never got that with Nana. It was very much black and white, totally different. I mean, you know, very different ends of the spectrum.
So Marilyn, I have an out of the box question for you. So be ready, okay? So you disclosed to everyone in the last episode that you were a matchmaker and you worked for Just for Lunch. So when you got someone who was Jewish across the table from you, did you have that kind of a specification that that person said, I have to find a Jewish person. I have to make sure that they have Jewish children. Were they Holocaust survivors? Anything like that come into your world from Just for Lunch?
And It's Just Lunch, I don't recall ever meeting anyone else who was a descendant of a Holocaust survivor, because I would remember that being that I'm a descendant. I don't recall ever, but my job was to match people up within their parameters. So if people were open-minded to meeting someone outside of their religion, that made my job easier. If people were, whether it was Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist, agnostic, my job as a matchmaker was to perhaps present to them to keep an open mind, but also to respect their wishes, because I know that my mother, much like Bonnie's mother, she didn't push it as hard, but I'll never forget one of my parents didn't have a lot of wisdoms or things that they passed down onto us that I recall. But one thing I do remember my mom saying is, nobody loves a Jew like a Jew. And I know that some of, we come from a lot of mixed marriages within our families, within our own family, within cousins. But luckily, all of my nieces and nephews who have married outside of the faith of Judaism have very amazing partners that embrace the Jewishness that their spouses have. But I never forgot my mom saying, nobody loves a Jew like a Jew. That somewhere, if you go back further enough back in the family, you'll find someone anti-Semitic. So I'm happy that I married, my husband was married before me to a woman who was not Jewish. And I think his parents were very happy that he ended up with me, someone Jewish. We're not religious. We don't even belong to a synagogue, but we have the culture and the traditions, and that bind us always. We never have to explain our holidays. We never have to explain our traditions, our crazy sayings.
Okay, so we're getting to the end of the second and probably the last episode. So I'm going to ask each of you to kind of recap a memory that you want to bring, and that could be also tie into what is on your bucket list for you to accomplish. The other question I want, before you answer that, is this. We just went through the pandemic. We're still kind of not out of the pandemic. Did the last 2 years of isolation relate to you as being a survivor? And in which way? I'll give you an example from myself. My mom never talked about her Auschwitz camp experience, but when I was in isolation, I thought, geez, if my mom could make it through Auschwitz, how could I even begin to think like, I can't do this, it's too long, I'm in isolation, I'm going nuts. I just used my mom's strength to be able to power through COVID. So that as my sort of getting your mind to think in the direction I want you to think. Was there anything that your parents shared from their experience that got you through the last 2 years? And Bonnie, you certainly can add into that answer as well, so you don't have to feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
I think we're probably all in agreement that we have the thought that compared to what our parents went through, this was nothing. Not dismissing it, not trivializing the impact that COVID has had on the globe, because my son escaped Brazil with 8 hours behind him and they shut the borders. He just made it back to the US by the skin of his teeth. But nonetheless, to be brutalized and dehumanized by other human beings the way that they went through, and not knowing if it's ending or if this is the end. We at least had the light at the end of the tunnel to know that technology will kick in and no one's gonna, we're not going to die here. We're going to leave better legacies. Cannot even begin to compare the two. What they went through by far and away is a lot harsher than what we went through.
Of course.
So it would make it easier for us to get through it.
So the last question I'll bring to you is, what's left on your bucket list, Mike? And maybe Mrs. Growe, you can help Mike with Mrs. Growe with that question. and Marilyn and Steve and Ron, if you're around still. So you can tell us.
It's Nana, not Mrs. Growe.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. So who's going to be first to tell us what's to be done left on your bucket list?
One for me is I just want to go to Israel with my wife.
Very nice.
Trip that I want to take.
Next year, 75. So you may.
Well, when the time is right, we'll both know.
Go ahead. Who's next?
I look forward to the Vienna trip that we just recently talked about.
Okay.
Okay. And
That's
tell
on
us
my
what
bucket list.
you were talking. We don't know what behind that. So tell us quickly what you mean.
Well, I'll let Michael elaborate.
Yeah, I guess I'm the organizer of that, but to elaborate, our first cousins on our father's side just went on a trip to Vienna that was sponsored by the Jewish Welcome Vienna Service organization, where they're trying to attract former residents and descendants of former residents of Vienna back to Vienna and basically show them how wonderful it is and how vibrant the Jewish life is there. And so they actually pay for your plane ticket and lodging and transportation, and they have all these special tours and programs. And they just went a few weeks ago and they told me about it and how wonderful it was and encouraged us to go. So I've just, I discussed it with my siblings. I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful for all of us to be able to go to the city that our father grew up in, which he was still very proud of, by the way, even with the war and everything. In fact, I was going to tell you, I'll sort of segue into, if it's okay with you, Ron, into sort of one of the highlights of my life was when I lived in Amsterdam for a year. I lived and worked there for a year abroad. My parents came and visited me. And so it was really cool to be this American citizen living in Europe, having his European parents living in America come to visit. And not only did I get to show them around Amsterdam, which my mother's sister lived in before she went off to the camps where she died, but the three of us went to Vienna. And I got to see Vienna through my father's eyes. And that, I'm getting a little choked up. That was amazing. And
Yeah,
I would like to be able to
he
share
loved
that.
He loved the
Yeah.
city.
And so he still had a love for it. So this was in like 1998. So this is, 50 years later, and he still was very proud of Vienna. And I got to see the house that he grew up in and the school that he went to, and they're all still there. The school is still a school. It's still the number 51 bus from downtown Vienna to their neighborhood. It hasn't changed. And so that was a real highlight for me, getting to see Vienna through his eyes. So to circle back, that's why it would be a great thing and a bucket list for me as well, to be able to go with my siblings and have them see our father's city. I could help show them. Now, I know Marilyn has been there. I've already been to Vienna twice now, once with him and another time later with a best friend. I know Marilyn's been there once, but I still think it would be a different experience seeing it all together and seeing more of the Jewish side of Vienna, which funny enough, he didn't really show me, and it wasn't something he was familiar with. So we didn't spend much time exploring Jewish Vienna. So that's sort of my answer.
So we're left with Marilyn, and I'm going to come to you, Seth. So I'm not going to leave you out. And then I'm also going to ask Nana if she has anything on your bucket list. And Nana, if you want to respond, you can say it at any time. So Mike, help her with that answer.
So I'm embarrassed. You posed that question, what's on your bucket list? So I've had time to prepare, Jeffrey, but I have to say that I've never been a long-term goal-oriented person. I've never thought about 5 years down the road. If someone said, I really live in the moment. So my bucket list is, I don't have I've gotten to travel and see a lot of the world. Sure, I'd love to do more travel, but I'm a very content person. I love my family. I love my husband. I love where I live. My husband and I recently moved out to the desert, and I've taken up golf. I guess my goal is to win a championship here at the club, but I just want to continue enjoying my life and creating great memories whenever I have the opportunity.
Oh, that's great. And when you get your hole in one first, you got to call me, okay?
My husband has one. He got one. He made a little thing for himself. He took the ball and put it in a little thing. But and it's wonderful. And Jeffrey, you had said something earlier about your mother. Shoot, what she said. and I can't remember now. You triggered something. If I think of it, I'll raise my hand.
All
But
right.
something you had said made me, I could relate to it. Sorry.
Seth, and then we're going to wrap it up with Nana.
For my bucket list, it's kind of two-part, and I never really, kind of like Marilyn. I hate the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But thinking about in terms of this context, what's on my bucket list? What's on my Jewish bucket list, maybe, or my descendant bucket list? My daughter will become a bat mitzvah in 2 years, in June of 2024. And like days after her bat mitzvah, we're supposed to be going on Temple Israel's group trip to Israel. I want to be there, and I want to be able to take my daughter to Israel after she becomes a bat mitzvah. That's on my bucket list. But I would love to be honored if Nana would be so kind as to hang on, for her to be able to see, and I do air quotes. I would love for her to be able to be around to have the first great grandchild become a bat mitzvah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
But if she differs, then I won't hold it against her.
All right. So Michael, what to help Nana? Go ahead.
Nana, you want to tell them? She mentioned 3 things. So you want to tell them the 3 things on your bucket list?
Yes, I would like to see Israel live forever. So we never lose it again. That's number 1 wish. And I would like to walk down my granddaughter on her day of marriage.
You want to say her name?
My Candace Nicole. I would like to walk her down the aisle.
How old is she? How old is she?
She's 40.
Okay.
And she lives in Chicago.
And she's in a serious relationship right now with a guy. They just moved in together a few weeks ago.
I'll tell you, if you were like my mom, she'd pick up the phone and she'd tell her granddaughter to get that ring on her finger, and she didn't allow anybody to get in their way. I often said that my mom had a postdoctorate degree in Jewish guilt.
No, but you have it wrong here. We're encouraging Candace to delay, because the longer she delays, the longer Nana lives.
No, that's not.
No. But anyway, I know that's our joke. But you want to tell them the 3rd thing on your bucket list? Papa?
Oh yeah, I'm sure Charlie is waiting patiently for me. I can't wait to go to him.
And you'll probably have a nice dance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And on that note, I couldn't be so, this was terrific to bring all of you together in such a loving family. It is just so emotive, and I'm holding back.
It's a blessing.
It is a blessing, and Nana, to have you with us, to be part of this, to actually record this and to be able to share this is super. So I want to thank all of you for this hour and a half of terrific talk for the Obligations of Memory podcast. I'm Jeffrey Geisner. Thank you so much for listening, and thank the Growes and Seth. You are terrific. And I'm so happy that we could now have a deeper relationship with all of you than I had before. Bonnie, thank you as well. So thanks a lot.
I want to say a special thank you to Seth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seth.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Very proud of you. Mad at you for making me cry, but very proud of you.
I love you.
I love you all.
Love you
Thank
all.
you, Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
It was an honor to be your first, Jeffrey. So thank you. It's really an honor.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. See you later.